From the years of 1939 to 1960, Ted Williams was a left fielder for the Boston Red Sox. He also was the highest paid player in Major League Baseball at that time, making around $125,000 a year. Well, in the final years of his career, he suffered from a pinched nerve in his neck that affected him to the point where he could hardly turn his neck to see the pitcher. It was as a result of that for the first time in his career, he batted under a 300 and only had 10 home runs. Well, when that contract basically had passed, the Red Sox offered him the same contract for another $125,000 a year, to which Mr. Williams refused to sign, feeling he was not deserving to be paid that much money. And so instead, he renegotiated with them a contract of just $31,000. If we could perhaps put a value or estimate on our service to God and faithfulness to God, how much would it be? Or how about if we could rate ourselves on a scale of 1 to 10? Where would we put ourselves? I say that, and before you answer that, I would like to share with you two passages of Scripture. The first one is found in Luke chapter 18, verses 9 through 14, where Jesus tells the parable of the story of two men who go into the temple to pray, one a Pharisee, the other a tax collector. We'll begin reading in verse 11. Notice it says, "The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself, 'God, I thank you that I'm not like other men, extortioners, unjust adulterers, or even as this tax collector. I fast twice a week, I give tithes of all that I possess.' But notice the tax collector, standing afar off, would not so much as raise his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast, saying, 'God, be merciful to me, a sinner.'" Now let me ask you, among these two men, which one had the more impressive resume? On a scale of 1 to 10, which one could be rated higher? Well, obviously the Pharisee, right? But according to verse 14 in Jesus' own words, which one left justified or forgiven? It was the tax collector, wasn't it? You see, when we think of our debt to God and our service to God, we are owed nothing from God. God literally owes us nothing on account of what we have done for him and continue to do for him. In other words, in spite of all of the years of our studying of the Scriptures, in spite of how many hours we've put in worship to God and in Bible class to God, in spite of how many souls we have brought to Christ, in spite of how much mistreatment we have endured or hours of service and serving one another on behalf of God, in spite of how often we've had to love the unlovable, in spite of how often we have abstained from temptation and just gave it our all for the cause of Christ, may we still have the attitude and the outlook as you go now into Luke chapter 17. And when you consider verses 7 through 10, when Jesus tells this parable of a servant who appears in his circumstances had to do a whole lot more than other servants, look at verse 10. He says, "So likewise, when you have done all these things which you are commanded, say, 'We are unprofitable servants.'" And we have basically just done what was our duty to do.